welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelson.
Tonight we're reading Judges chapter 6. It's the first of 3 sections of Bible, 6, 7, and 8 of Judges, and we're going to talk about a man named Gideon. When I was in Moscow 3 years ago, I gave them a series of lessons from the book of Judges. And their campaign that they called the Jews for Jesus campaign of Moscow was called the Sword of the Lord, of course, and of Gideon. I mean, that's what we hear. It sounded so military. It might make some people nervous to use that term. It might make others very comfortable to think we're going out on the streets, we're going to go evangelize and share the good news. When I was in Moscow, I kept seeing military personnel, I kept seeing police everywhere. And you could, if you were in a bad way, think you were in a police state. The image of swords, and I keep thinking of Vladimir Putin, who at that time was what we called saber rattling against Ukraine, all about whether they were going to pay what they owed and we were going to cut off the gas and this whole thing. It was most interesting to be there at that time. But this idea of biblical imagery really is necessary. We have to adjust our mind to the sword of the Lord, the sword of Gideon, the next judge in our continuing series of who are the generals in this case. So Gideon is the one whose story eventually gave us that sword of the Lord term. And we'll have some lessons starting tonight for 3 different chapters. So the story is found in chapter 6. It's a very sad story to begin, and it is just like you would imagine. Like, what have we looked at? Look at chapter 5 and verse 31. Let all your enemies perish, Lord, but let those who love him be like the rising of the sun in its might. And the land was undisturbed for 40 years. You think, this is a great place. I hope it ends right there. And the Jewish people lived happily ever after and lived honorably. But verse 1 of chapter 6, then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian 7 years. Not what's supposed to happen. We were living wrong. As Jewish people, we don't like to read of our defeats, certainly not self-causative defeat. We like it when there's hatred without a cause, like in Psalm 69, Sinat Chinam. By the way, later in Jewish history, the rabbis tell us that hatred without a cause was the reason for the destruction of the Second Temple. We don't like it when bad things happen, and we're the reason that they happen. Why? It means we're not so good after all. Who wants to read their own obituary and it says, yeah, he wasn't very good? Who wants to read the story in column 8? Yeah, Mendelson was pretty rotten to the core. He had a couple good days, but really, he was a no-goodnik. We don't like it because it means we're not so good. It means when evil happens to us, that we're evil ourselves and no one wants to think of themselves as needing repair and needing to be forgiven, but reality is on us. So verse 1 tells us, God gave us over into the hands of the Midianites. It wasn't the Midianites were stronger, it wasn't the Midianites were more clever, it was God judged us. And that's the pattern we've seen in the book of Judges. Well, many will question whether that's fair. I mean, is it right to say that some folks do evil and everyone gets punished for that? Think about it. I don't know about you, but that's certainly what I remember from primary school. Maybe you remember that as well, not that you had one. But as one of the great methods of sniffing out a culprit when something was damaged in the school, the teacher would say something like, okay, if no one will confess to doing the damage, then you will all be punished. Everyone will miss, recess or something equally valuable to a kid. Finally, someone would turn in the enemy of our free time, and the punishment would be exacted on the one responsible. Perhaps the Bible informed my old teachers. When Israel sins, no matter how many that may be, and God considers it enough to bother him, he judges the entire nation. To be fair, he'll also judge the ones who bring the judgment on Israel, but that's another lesson. For now, verse 1 tells me everything. Then we read that God would use the Midianites to destroy the Jewish people's crops for 7 years. Look at it in verse 5 and 6. Well, let's get it in context. Verse 2, the power of Midian prevailed against Israel, Israel, because of Midian, the sons of Israel made for themselves the dens which were in the mountains, the caves, and the strongholds. We tried to hide. That's what it's saying. We tried to find anywhere, like Osama bin Laden was hiding from Operation Desert Storm. And they finally found him in a cave, in a cave, in a cave. Verse 3, for it was when Israel had sown, in other words, when they were out working in the fields, farmers, that the Midianites would come from the east with the Amalekites and the sons of the east and go against them. Hebrew word is Allah, meaning to go up. So they would camp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, which is on which coast? The west coast. So we've got people coming from the east, crashing all the way across, basically doing a scorched earth policy, getting rid of the entire agricultural crop of the Jewish people. They would camp against Israel and destroy as far as Gaza and leave no sustenance in Israel, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. So they got rid of all the economy of the Jewish people, all the capacity to eat. It's basically a starvation that they were doing. Verse 5 and 6 says, for they would come up with their livestock in their tents, come in like locusts, not because they made noises bzz, like a locust, but it says in number. That's how it was so many, like a plague in Egypt, plague of locusts. Both they and their camels were innumerable. Of course, we know that they were countable, but they were so many that they were as if they were innumerable. And they came into the land to devastate it. So Israel was brought very low because of Midian, and the sons of Israel cried to the Lord. It takes desolation at times to wake us up, doesn't it? Israel was brought very low. Not good. How horrible. You have a garden in your backyard and you've seen it when certain animals come in and have their way with the fruit and veg. We have this bush turkey that somehow flies over our fence. My wife has put up like chicken wire all around it, and somehow that crazy turkey can get inside there, grab, eat, and fly out. I don't know how it does it. If it were just an emu, it wouldn't fly. After all your hard work to make it nice and good, imagine if you were the Prime Minister of Israel back in Bible days, in these days, and for years, every time your people had a good crop coming in, the enemies would invade, maraud, and ruin your food supply. And then they killed all the cattle. The economy would plummet, wages would shrink, the trickle-down effect would be ruinous. Militarily, we were a weak country then. Everything stacked against us, and worse than that, whose fault was it? It's our fault. But they devastated, meaning they either killed them, ate them, destroyed them. We don't know. So, what's God going to do? In verse 6, we cry to the Lord. What happens? God hears us. So what's he going to do? Send someone to save us. When we cried to the Lord on account of Midian, verse 8, the Lord sent a prophet. First he sends a prophet, an unnamed prophet who reminds us of our history, that God delivered us from a similar terrible fate in Egypt, verses 8 and 9. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt. That's sort of God's signature throughout the Bible. Hey, don't forget, I'm the God who did this. The biggest thing God ever did for the Jewish people, deliver us from Egypt. Biggest thing. It's his signature throughout the record of the Older Testament. And brought you up out of the house of slavery. I delivered you. In other words, I did it. It wasn't your cleverness. It wasn't your strength. It was not your wisdom. It wasn't your might. I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hands of all your oppressors and dispossessed them before you and gave you their land. So now he's saying, not only did I take you out, I brought you in. Where did he bring us? To the very place where they were sitting. That's right, the land of Canaan. So he's saying, hello, you guys forgot me. You've been living godlessly. I've brought the Midianites in. They're destroying you. Now you cry. I'm still the same God who ever was, who ever will be. Don't forget that. And I brought you here. It would be like we're here in Bondi Junction, and there might be a time when we're chased out for one reason or another, or they attempted to chase us out. If you were around in 2005, you would know that we used to be on Oxford Street, and some thugs took a cricket bat and a baseball bat and smashed our window on Australia Day night to threaten, and then they called and they threw paint on my wife's car and did all kinds of evil things to chase us out. So what did we do? We called the media, and then we called the police. And the media came and videotaped us sweeping up and trying to clean up, and they interviewed me, and we were open for business the next day. The police saw the same video we did, and those culprits are still at large. But we know the whole circumstance. We have the email addresses from which they sent us threats, all these things. So what was the point? What were they saying? Get out of town. And what did we do? We went to prayer. So called the media, called the police, called on God. We did that. We prayed. And we asked God, what does he want for us? I knew we had to call the media first, but we called on God, and what did he do? He gave us assurance that he called us to Bondi Junction. So we're not going anywhere, and we haven't yet. We're still here. 2 more times in the next few months, there was a similar attack on our front plate glass window. And so after 3 times, 2 of which were covered by the press, the media, the TV, the bad guys stopped doing it. But we didn't stand up in our strength. We stood up in the strength of what God had said he wanted us here. And that's what I think God was saying to the Jewish people. I brought you out. I brought you in. I delivered you and I settled you here. I dispossessed them before you and gave you their land. God reminded us of his warning to avoid the gods of the people in whose land we were going to live. I'm not sure where the prophet went, but wherever it was, nothing changed. Maybe he went to the tabernacle or to the leadership of the day, but wherever he went, nothing in Israel adjusted. He told us not to fear the gods of the Amorites. See it? Verse 10. I am the Lord. So he says, this is the prophet speaking. I am the Lord your God. You shall not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not obeyed me. The Hebrew there, and it's also the same as it was in Russian for me that week, is not you did not obey me, but you did not listen to me. Really, obedience to God is listening to God. If you listen to him, if you're still listening, you're going to do the things he wants you to do. And when you disobey, what are you doing? You're plugging your ears saying, I don't want to hear you, I don't want to hear you, I don't want to hear you, right? Go ahead and talk, I'm not listening, like a child. But remember, these people were counting, the Amorites and all the others, were counting on their gods for fertility, their gods for agricultural plenty, their gods for military victory. And here are the Jewish people who've had God for the last 4 decades. It's been really good until the last 7 years. And we start living badly. And as a result, these guys come in from the east and devastate us. So some of the people, you can imagine, were saying, a lot of good that Yahweh did us. Let's go with these guys, because the last 5, 6, 7 years, they've been winning. So I'm going with the victory guys, not the loser God, which is our God. You see how that works? So he says, don't fear them. They're false gods. The number 1 commandment is always get God number 1. Knock out the idol. Yeah, we'll see a couple of them in just a minute. So God says, why is he upset? You have not, verse 10, listened to me. In other words, God is taking this disobedience personally. All we had to do was listen to his voice. It's not about doing duties. It's about a personal relationship with the Almighty. And if we don't listen to him, it hits him hard. He knows he's most glorified on the earth when we listen to him. He knows he receives glory when we're satisfied in him and when we enjoy his presence. That's when everything works best for us and for him. But our rebellion messed and messes everything up. So what does God do since we're still not listening to the prophet, the unnamed prophet? What's he going to do? No, not yet. No, remember, he's still going to try to help us because we cried out to him. So he sends someone else, not a prophet this time. His own angel comes to Israel. Only where does this angel visit? You know, if you want to send a powerful, strong voice to America, would you tweet somebody in Oklahoma? Or would you go knock on the White House door? If you wanted to communicate to the people of Israel today, 6 million Jews and 1 million others of this and that, you wouldn't go to Zimbabwe and walk in a in a little hut in a village somewhere. If you want to communicate to Israel of this time at this place, what would you do? Well, if I were God, I would. There was no temple yet. So there was the tabernacle, right? But he doesn't send the angel to the tabernacle. Would you send him to the priests? Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. He doesn't. Not a chance. He sent the angel or messenger of his life to a father and son team, Joash and Gideon. And due to the marauding situation, Gideon is down in the stable at their farm, keeping things neat and tidy and away from the Midianites. He's in the barn. He's a farmer, a country worker. He's not even stationed with the troops. That's why the opening line of the angel in verse 12 is so unusual. Let's read 11 first. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress in order to save it from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." Valiant. The Hebrew word is chayil, like Eshet chayil, and can mean excellent, like Proverbs 31 says, an excellent wife. It means capable. It means powerful. But never does it mean you're a good farmer. In fact, if I read this correctly, it's almost an insult, like a bit of a laughing angel who says, "You," laughing inside, "yes, you, there with the winnowing fork in your hand, you're a mighty warrior." Oy. Gideon is going to respond with 4 doubts. I was going to write them up, but you'll get these pretty clearly. 4 doubts that he has towards this angel of God. God sends his own angel, and we don't know who this is. Some people say this is Yeshua. Some people say it's just an appearance of a primary angel, but we don't know. I don't think it's Yeshua. I don't denigrate those who say so. Gideon said, verse 13, look what he says, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles, which our fathers told us about, saying, didn't the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." The Lord looked at him and said, wait, who looked at him? The Lord. So this is when people get confused. If this isn't the Lord, Yeshua, then who's the angel of the Lord? But this has been something that's happened throughout the Torah itself, is that there has been appearances of the angel of the Lord, who sometimes is called God, sometimes is the angel of the Lord. I'm going to let it just be an unanswered question without forcing it to be a theophany or a Christophany, an appearance, phanos, of the Messiah. So let's look at these 4 doubts. We'll do it one at a time, where he's doubting about God and the situation. In other words, Gideon is not even a man of faith yet, much less a man of war. But, and here's the point for us here, as we are in the battlefield, whether I was in Moscow or here in Sydney, God didn't really care if Gideon or if you are a warrior already. He wants to use people, and he'll use whoever's nearby for his purposes. If you're near, and if you're ready to serve him, he'll use you. He doesn't need Billy Graham. He can use you. He doesn't need Reinhard Bonnke. He can use you. He doesn't need the Apostle Paul or Bob Mendelson. He needs you to be near him and available. Okay? Now, in today's story, Gideon starts as a coward. Let's see where he goes in the unfolding story. I said he doubted 4 times. See if you can write these down in your own notes and check your own heart at times too. Verse 13, Gideon said, "Why are we suffering so much?" His first doubt was in the love of God. He doubted God's love. Does God allow these bad things to happen to us because he hates us? Has God abandoned us? If God is really near and cares, why does all this evil overtake us? Friends, this is the constant thread of communication of an unbeliever that we hear at the shop, in our continued conversation, on our Facebook page, in our YouTube channel, wherever we are. The number one go-to answer of those who don't believe is, how could I believe in a God who would let suffering happen in Zimbabwe, in Syria? My goodness, how many displaced people are there in Syria? How about the 6 million Jews? How about all the suffering of all the peoples right now? What about little babies who are innocent? How could they have Fukushima, Christchurch, earthquakes, dead people? You know, the number one go-to question is not really a question at all. It's an allegation. And it's a doubt of the love of God. That God somehow is responsible for darkness and evil and pain and suffering, instead of looking at his love against that or in the midst of that. His second doubt can be summarized in God's wrong choices. Look what he says, verse 14. The Lord looked at him and said, "Go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Have I not sent you?" And you got to get the irony of this moment. He's downstairs in the barn, hiding from the marauding Midianites, and just has a winnowing fork, which is a fork that lifts the wheat, say, and then the good stuff falls back down, and the chaff, that's the undesirable little amount of grain or not grain that you've collected along with that harvest, it blows away in the wind. So he's downstairs, he throws it up, right? That's what you do. The good stuff falls back down and the bad stuff flies away. That's his weapon of choice, right? So he's hardly the chosen one. I think of, what's his name in The Matrix? Neo, yeah. No, you got the wrong guy. It's the same thing. He said, "O Lord," verse 15, "how shall I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is the least in Manasseh." I told you we'd find it. "And I'm the youngest in my father's house." What? You want who to bring the message? You're choosing me? You've got to be kidding. I'm nobody. I'm not even from a good family. And I'm the youngest one among them. So I doubt this is really God. And if it is, I think he's not very good at choosing servants to represent him. Look what he continues to say. "The Lord said to him, Surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat Midian as one man." Not that Gideon is that one man, but whoever you gather together as an eshkol echad, one cluster. Well, the military establishment. So Gideon said to him, "If now I've found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it's you who speak with me. Please don't depart from here until I come back to you and bring out my offering and lay it before you." And he said, "Okay, I'll stick around." So the angel of the Lord listens to this negotiator, right, who says, hey, I'm gonna go out there, I'll be back. But he's doubting the whole time. Gideon, like Moses and Abraham in days gone by, doubted God's choices. Do you see that? I'm the baby in mine. Verse 19. So Gideon has the angel of the Lord on hold there in the barn, right? And he goes out and prepares a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. He put the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot and brought them out to him under the oak and presented them. You know how long that would take? This is bigger than a Christmas lunch. This is bigger than a Seder. I mean, it's a lot of work. One guy, he didn't say, "Hey, Mom, would you pick up some potatoes and put it with my goat?" I mean, he's doing all that work. Pretty good chef for a winnowing fork holder. But it takes so long. And the angel of the Lord is sitting out there. Okay. Verse 20, the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth." And he did. In other words, it became an offering. It was handed to the angel, who looked like a human enough that Gideon thought he was a human and could prepare human food. But now the angel turns into God, at least for a moment, and says, "You want to please me, bring it like a sacrifice in the tabernacle." And what did Gideon do? He did just exactly what he was told. He did so. Verse 21, "Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the matzah, and fire sprang up from the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. Then the angel of the Lord vanished from his sight. That vanished we use because it sounds so mysterious. The Hebrew is halach, just to go. He just left. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Whoa, wow." I mean, this is my, oh Lord God, for now I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face. He knew who this was with that whole wand, almost a magic wand, wasn't it? And then it got consumed. His offering was consumed just like would have happened at the tabernacle on the altar. This isn't just Larry or Menachem. This is now somebody. He knew it was the Lord. And now he's in trouble because nobody sees God and lives. When Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Oi gewalt," really. Now I've seen the angel of the Lord. And God said to him, "Shalom." I mean, that is so holy. Shalom lecha. Peace be unto you. Don't fear. You shall not die. How many times in the Bible do we read the phrase, "Do not fear, do not be"? One for each day. It's true. 365 times in the Bible. Do not fear. And if you're a Hebrew, using a Hebrew calendar, there's only 360 days, but we make them up in the leap years. But for the solar-based people, that's pretty remarkable. Don't be afraid, because every day we have reason to be afraid, and every day God comes to us. So here's Gideon. I mean, he's got real reason to be afraid because no one can see God and live. He says, "You're not going to die." Lo tamut. So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord, and he named it Yehovah Shalom, the Lord peace, or we say the Lord is peace. To this day, not today, but in the days of Judges, it's still in Ophrah of the Abi Israel. Now on the same night, the Lord said to him, "Take your father's bull And a second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father. What? Why is this Jewish guy of the tribe of Manasseh has a Baal, has a deity there in his house? The dad, yeah. So if you were going to choose somebody who's going to be a holy guy, you'd probably choose someone with a holy dad to go up against the Midianites or to represent. God is a surprising God, isn't he? And cut down the Asherah that is beside it. So that's the female deity. So there's a male deity and a female deity there at his home. God's telling him to go take the bull, both bulls, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this stronghold in an orderly manner. I love that. Take the second bull, offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down. Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had spoken to him, and because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night. Doubt number 3 is found in verse 25 and following in this altar destruction scene. His doubt was in the protection of God. He destroyed the idols in his father's house, which, by the way, might be where the apocryphal story of Abram and his father Terah came from. Do you know that story? Yeah, so Abram, Chaldees, they became Mexican. He came from Ur. Isn't that a great place? Hey, what should we name this city? Ur. Yeah, that'll do. So he's in Ur, and God tells him to get up and leave. Lech Lecha, chapter 12, verse 1 of Genesis. Get up and leave your father's house, your father and your household, and go to the land I'll show you. Now the story in the Midrash is that Abram is the son of Terah. We know that from Torah, Genesis 11. But that his father Terah is an idol worshiper. The story is that while his father was out, Abram goes in and destroys all the idols in the idol shop. In fact, that his father was an idol salesman, a merchant of idols. So he destroys them, except for one. And he puts a staff of some kind, a rod, a piece of wood, in the hand of this still standing idol. His father comes home and says, "What happened here?" And he says, "It looks like that one beat up all the other ones." And the father said, "That can't happen. They're just wood and stone." He said, "If they're wood and stone, why do you worship them?" Yeah. And so you wonder if that story influenced Gideon's story, or if maybe the Gideon story influenced the writing of the Midrash. There you go. Okay, it's good that you're there. So when did these boys go out and do this business? Nighttime. Lest anyone should see that it was he who had done this. His fears of retribution and his doubt in the protection of the Almighty were showing, if nothing less. Okay, he's doubted the love of God, he's doubted the choices of God, he's doubted the protection of God. And the fourth and most memorable doubt is in the story of the wet and dry fleece. His worry, his doubt, his fear was that God would not really come through for him. That is, that God would not be faithful to keep his own word, which he had uttered. Gideon doubted God's faithfulness. And if any of these stories is new to you, and even if they're somewhat familiar, I hope you'll read them again in light of what we're talking about today, and see the wonderful and awesome faithfulness of the Lord to Gideon, who, by the way, sometimes gets named Jerubbaal. Let's read just a little bit more. This fleece is pretty remarkable. It's just a funny story. Funny in the sense of sad, but just what we go through to make sure God is, are you sure? Are you sure, God? Are you sure? Yeah, so people talk about laying out a fleece before the Lord. This is where that story comes from, or that phrase comes from. Verse 28, when the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was torn down, and the Asherah which was beside it was cut down, and the second bull was offered on the altar which had been built. They said to one another, "Hey, who did this thing?" There's serious accusation going on. And when they searched about and inquired, they said, "Gideon, the son of Joash, did this thing." So he's caught out. He's painted into the corner. Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring out your son that he may die." So they don't just go get the boy, who's a man. They go to the father for whom, well, he's still responsible. He has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he's cut down the Asherah which was beside it. But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him. Whoever will plead, there's that same word, contend, plead, for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself, because someone has torn down his altar. So if you guys are worried about Baal, if you're worried about Baal, you don't have to protect him. If he's really a god, he'll defend himself. Why are you defending him? He's not a real god anyway. Now here is a beautiful result of Gideon's obedience, is that he's converted his dad.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
his dad is now saying, there is no idol in my house. We're getting rid of idols. I am so glad my boy did a good thing. And you crazy people, get out of here. By the way, the word contend or plead is the word rev, where we get Yeruv Baal. So the contender against Baal, Jerubbaal, is Gideon. That's where the word comes. Therefore on that day he named him Jerubbaal, that is to say, let Baal contend against him, because he's torn down his altar. Really, it's I'm contending against Baal. It's really that way. But I like what the Bible says too. So all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. So the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon. Woo-hoo. He blew a trumpet, and the Abiezrites were called together to follow him. Just a few people. If this isn't David and Goliath, I don't know what is. But then he sent messengers throughout Manasseh, and they all were called together to follow him. And then he sent messengers, so he sent out a global email to the 12 tribes, and look who responded. Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet. So now it's not just one tribe, not even half the tribe of Manasseh, but now it's all three other tribes join them. And Gideon said to God, "Yet if you'll deliver Israel through me as you've spoken, hey look, I'll put a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece only, and it's dry on all the ground, then I'll know that you'll deliver Israel through me as you've spoken." Tell you what, I like this idea about you saving us. I think it's a great idea, but can we be sure? Can we get some verification that this is really the God of heaven, God who delivered Israel? Could I get a witness? Okay, he's doubting the faithfulness of God. Well, there's the history of the Jewish people, and we've been living in peace for 40 years because we've been doing right. His dad built the wrong Baal at home, and it's the neighborhood's Baal, and he's been infected with this. The Midianites have been trashing everybody. Do I blame him? Well, look, he's going to be called a member of the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. So he starts as a coward, but he's going to grow in this. And we're going to see him over the next 2 weeks after tonight. I like the guy. So maybe I don't blame him. But this whole negotiation of, tell you what, I'm going to put my fleece of wool on the ground. Just think of a lamb rug. And if I come out in the morning and the rug is wet but the ground is dry, tell you what, I trust you. Okay? And it was so, verse 38. When he arose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece, he drained the dew from the fleece, a bowl full of water. Wow. All around was dry. The fleece was wet. Okay. God came through. So Gideon said, verse 39, "Don't let your anger burn against me that I may speak once more. Please let me make a test once more with the fleece." Can we do this again? Can we negotiate it again? You know, there's Orthodox Jews, Reformed Jews, conservative Jews. Gideon is a negotiating Jew. He said to God, don't be upset. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, and let there be dew on all the ground. Can we do the reverse? And God, verse 40, did so that night, for it was dry only on the fleece, and dew was on all the ground. Read this whole story. In fact, I encourage you to read chapters 7 and 8. Altogether, this chapter reminds me, as we learn of the cowardice of Gideon, that God was not looking for champions who were noble, who were smart, who were able. He was looking for available soldier wannabes who could attend to his business. He's looking for men and women of faith who want to be what God wants us to be. So if that's you, whether here in Sydney or those folks back in Moscow or wherever you on the internet are listening, then like Gideon, when sometimes we get it right and sometimes we don't, we can go out in the strength of the Lord and proclaim to the people of Israel the wonderful truths of our God. To him and to him alone be glory in our community now and forever. Amen. That's chapter 6 of Judges.